All right, I'm going to test your knowledge. Lions and tigers and bears. Good, you got it. Do you realize that that is, I think I counted 87 years old? That is from the Wizard of Oz, the movie in 1939. Don't we feel old now? Lions and tigers and bears. It's this point in the movie where our main character knows that she has to go on an adventure, yet will encounter dangers for no fault of her own. They will come, and they are anticipating. They're fearful of what traps lay ahead of them. And what we've been looking at all summer is we've been looking at the story of God's people as they've been in exile in the Babylonian kingdom and then the Persian kingdom, and then released from exile to return. And we've been looking at the dangers that have surrounded them and all the ways that God has helped them persevere and be protected through all the traps. Today we're going to look at one particular trap. It's a famous Sunday school story. You've probably all heard it if you attended Sunday school. It's the story of Daniel and the lion's den. Who has not heard of this story? Look at that. You've all heard of it. So as with everything, when it comes to preaching, the more familiar you think you know, probably the less you know. So pay attention this morning to see what you may have missed in your understanding of the lion's den. But also be hearing. Listen for how Daniel escapes the trap. Because that's where we want to find our lesson this morning. How does one escape the lions and tigers and bears? Except in Daniel's case, it's not bears. It's bureaucrats. Same thing, right? Anyways. We join our chapter. It's a lot of verses we're going to cover, but I'll mostly summarize the scripture. We're going to start off talking about the trap that is set. And we're going to talk, first of all, the trap that is set for Daniel. Daniel is a godly and effective man. We see that in verse 3. This Daniel became distinguished above all the high officials and satraps, because an excellent spirit was on him, and the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. King Darius at the time loved Daniel, one of his chief officials. In fact, he structured the government so that everyone in government would answer to three people, one of which was Daniel. But then Daniel went on to distinguish himself. He was a trustworthy, honorable, godly man. And the King Darius said, I'm just going to make him number one. Number one over all my officials. Darius loved the fact that he had a reliable underling, a reliable lieutenant. And in government, the more powerful a man is, the more insecure he or she can be when it comes to those who work for him. He could trust Daniel. He was a godly and effective man. So what is the trap that's being set for him? All the bureaucrats, all the bears, did not like the fact that Daniel was being recognized and elevated. So they had to get him. And try as they might, they could not find any negligence or corruption within Daniel's activity as a government official. He was a godly and effective man. And in verse 5, they come to this conclusion. We shall not find any ground of complaint against this Daniel, unless we find it in connection to the law of God. In other words, they're going to go after him because of his faith as one of the people of God, one of the Jewish nation. They're going to get him when it comes to his faith. Now we look at this and go, this is not fair. Why? Why should Daniel be a target because he's a godly and effective man. Well, life is not fair. People are not just. And Daniel is about to fall in to the trap being set for himself. But he's not the only one who's being trapped. In addition to Daniel being trapped, there's a trap set for Darius the king. To get Daniel, these bears, these bureaucrats, have to trap the king into a course of action. So what they do when they talk about the plot, they're going to use the law of Persia against the law of God. They're going to get a law that's going to force Daniel to make a choice between following Persian law or God's law. How do they do this? In verse 7, all the high officials of the kingdom, all the prefects, all the satraps, all the counselors, and the governors are all agreed. This is consensus, total consensus in Darius's government to establish an ordinance to enforce an injunction. And the nature of this is quite simple. For a period of 30 days, O King Darius, may you live forever, will have no one pray to a god except that they pray to you, King Darius, for 30 days. If they do, we'll throw them in the lion's den. And this enticement, this recommendation appeals to Darius's pride. Why, of course, I'm just that important. For 30 days, all shall pray to me. Not thinking for a moment that this is going to create conflict for many of his subjects who seek to live faithful lives according to God. He falls for the plot. In verse 9, King Darius signed the document and the injunction. It's like, this is a great law. So what are we to make of the trap being set both for Daniel and for Darius? Well, on the one hand, you've heard the saying, you're not paranoid if the world is out to get you. In the case of Daniel, the bureaucrats were out to get him. He was an effective and faithful man, but in the circumstance he was in, that was viewed with jealousy and envy, and it was set in motion a plot against him. We've got to recognize that no matter how scrupulous, how honorable, how faithfully we pursue God, it's precisely that faithfulness that could lead us into a trap. For example, you're in school and all the other kids are doing certain things or saying certain things or have certain attitudes, and there's a temptation that if you want to remain honorable, it's going to run against the desire to please your friends. You may be accused of not being cool, or, whatever insult may come your way. And there's pressure to conform to a culture that is against what God would have us do. As we grow up, that same dynamic sometimes turns into a work environment where perhaps a boss has come to us with an unethical request. And we are put in a position where we have to say no to our boss to remain true to our God. And our ethics demand that the law of the boss be ignored in favor of the law of God. There's many ways that we, in our pursuit of godliness, will, as unfairly as it seems, be subject to traps. So there's two kinds of traps, though. There's the trap for Daniel, a trap for a righteous person. Someone pursuing an ethical, honorable approach to a life with God, being entrapped by those who don't want that to happen. But then there's a temptation for Darius. There's a trap in temptation. He's prideful. He likes the fact that this will give him an ego stroke, and he falls prey to a temptation. So these are two traps that we can expect to face. On the one hand, a trap for the righteous. On another hand, a trap for our temptation. We must be aware that the traps are there. What happens when these traps are sprung? Verse 10, we see that Daniel knew that the document had been signed. You understand? He gets it. He hears about the law. He knows people are out to get him. What does he do? He went to his house where he had windows on the upper chamber looking towards Jerusalem. If you can look out, you can look in. And he got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before God as he had done previously. You see, Daniel had a pattern of faithfulness. That pattern was exactly the thing that people were trying to get him in trouble for. When he knew people were out to get him, he did not break his pattern. He maintained fidelity, faithfulness to God. And the bureaucrats, they pounced. Verse 13, they answered and said before the king, Daniel, who was one of those exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or the injunction you have signed, but makes his petition 3 times a day. So they're watching him. They're spying and they're reporting on him. And they're closing the trap for Daniel, because Daniel has violated a command of the king and a law of the Medes and Persians, and therefore he is to be judged according to that law. He's to be thrown in the lion's den. But as much as Daniel is in peril and maintains fidelity as he's thrown into the lion's den, there's also the trap that was set for Darius. Darius's favorite official, most trusted lieutenant, is about to be killed, and he's in anguish. Verse 14 says this, then the king, when he heard these words, was much distressed and set his mind to deliver Daniel, and he labored till the sun went down to rescue Daniel. I love the language that's used there in this story. The king was distressed. The king set his mind to deliver. The king labored to rescue. The king that everyone was supposed to pray to for 30 days couldn't even deliver Daniel. Couldn't do it. He's not much of a god, is he? In fact, in his anguish, he became humbled before God. Verse 16, the king commanded, and Daniel was thrown or cast into the lion's den because he had no choice under the law of the Medes and Persians. But listen to the declaration of the king to Daniel. May your God, whom you serve continually, deliver you. He is humbled. He can't even follow his own law. To Daniel, he appeals to God for his deliverance. You hear that? In his pride, he thought he was good enough to be God. Now he's humbled and realizes he can't save Daniel. In fact, in verse 18, it goes on to say, then the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting. Didn't sleep a wink. Darius is in his trap of temptation, but Daniel is in his trap the trap of a righteous man by the enemy. So what do we make at this point? The trap is sprung. Daniel is thrown into the lion's den. Let me pose this question. How would we do if our faith was outlawed? Many of us would think, I'd be faithful. Maybe. It's all theory for us, isn't it? We live in a country of freedom. There's no one threatening us, threatening our life over our faith. This is not true of many people in the world. It is not theory, it is practice. Some of the stories in Nigeria have been horrifying to me this year of pastors and Christians subject to the worst kinds of treatment simply because they're Christians. But I ask the question to us, how would we do if what you're doing right now were against the law? I think we would struggle. I think we would struggle when we feel like, if we felt like our faith was illegal and opposed by the government power. I know I would. It would be hard. I would constantly be thinking, do I do this is this a faith issue or is this just a preference issue? And I'd constantly be thinking to myself, is this worth dying for or is it not worth dying for? The key to Daniel's success is he had a pattern of fidelity. What do I mean by that? He prayed 3 times a day, publicly, in the sense that people could see him pray 3 times a day, and he had done this over and over and over again. So when the law came into effect, he simply had to choose to continue his pattern of faithfulness. So if our faith was made illegal, what pattern would support our fidelity? In other words, is something we're doing now strong enough to carry us through a choice like that? What does our pattern of fidelity look like? It's interesting. I also want to talk about how do we respond when we fail. So there's 2 traps here. There's the trap of the righteous, who endures with a pattern of faithfulness, but then there's a trap for those who fall to temptation. How do we survive? How do we come through that trap? Darius's humility provides us a window. He makes a public appeal to God. He breaks his own law to pray on behalf of Daniel. So he adopts a faithful pattern, at least in that moment. I'm known to no illusions that Darius was a passionate believer in God, but he loved Daniel. A lot is made today over the concept of the Danial fast. Have you heard of the Danial fast? Some of us that are into health news, they base the Daniel fast on Daniel chapter 10, verse 3, where it talks about how Daniel fasted for 3 weeks, and it was just a certain number of foods, nothing fancy, no meats, just vegetables, fruit. And they've taken that as, well, this is something we should do. When most people talk about the Daniel fast, they're not talking about it from a spiritual perspective. They're talking about it from this is what I can do to clean out my gut, or to get my health or my metabolic system back on track, or this is good, clean living. And so people will talk about doing the Daniel fast. They never talk about doing the Daniel prayer. In other words, praying 3 times a day. And then chapter 9, we have the record of Daniel's prayer. And I challenge you, this afternoon, read Daniel's prayer from verse 3 to verse 19. It is a powerful prayer of confession before a God who is holy, and our need for him, our need for God's rescue of us. You see, Daniel had a pattern of fidelity. And when it came to the trap, he did not break his pattern. It was a strength for him. Let's look at the conclusion of the story. both for Daniel and for Darius. Daniel is vindicated. The night Daniel was thrown into the lion's den, Darius was in anguish, he was lamenting, and he was appealing to God on behalf of Daniel. He put him in a tomb, he put him in a den, he rolled the stone over the den, and he sealed it with a royal seal so that nothing could happen. Nothing nefarious could happen to Daniel apart from being eaten by lions. He goes and he fasts all night, doesn't sleep a wink. He wakes up the next day, and I almost imagine him running to the lion's den, hoping against hope. And he says the following: "O Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you served continually, been able to deliver you from the lions?" This is the dramatic moment of the whole story. King Darius pleading for proof of life. And the answer comes back from Daniel. "O king, live forever. My God sent an angel, shut the lion's mouth. They have not harmed me because I was found blameless before him. And also before you, O king, I have done no harm." Daniel is able to declare, "I've been rescued because God sent an angel, and it was proof, it's vindication that I've been faithful to God, and I have been for you as a servant." He's clean, he's righteous. And of course, the king is elated, and this gives, and it's like, pull him out, take him out. And he's taken out, and in the king's elation, he gives the commandment: those who had maliciously accused Daniel were brought and cast into the lion's den. So Daniel's vindication came with justice against those who hatched the plot. So Daniel is taken up, he's vindicated. Also, Darius comes out the other side of his trap. And this is what he does. In verse 25, "Then King Darius wrote to all the peoples, nations, and languages that dwelt on all the earth, 'Peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in all my royal domain people are to tremble and fear before the God of Daniel.'" He writes to everyone in his kingdom. Everyone needs to respect, revere, fear, and tremble before the God of Daniel. What's more, the king also has a declaration of his own. He is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed. His dominion shall be to the end. He delivers and rescues. He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth, and he has saved Daniel from the power of the lions. Now, does this mean Darius is a passionate believer in God? And maybe. Or he's just stating what's been made obvious to him, that God is awesome, and everyone needs to know about it. So when it comes to being taken up safe, and Daniel being vindicated, and Darius extolling God, I ask this question: who do we depend upon for rescue? Daniel did not depend upon Darius for rescue. Darius realized he could not depend on himself to rescue Daniel. God was the rescuer. And now Darius knows it, and he makes sure everyone else knows it. God is the rescuer of Daniel. What's interesting is when this is over, when the story ends, everyone is proclaimed to about God's rescue. So who do we depend on for our rescue? This is a trap that we struggle with because we live in a time and in a country of great ability and facility. The amount of money we have control over, the amount of health we have access to, the amount of options economically that are available to us. Many of us live most of our lives without depending on God at all. Who do we depend on for rescue? Because the traps are here. One trap of temptation is to feel like we don't need God. Maybe later on, maybe down the road, maybe if I get in a car accident, I might need God. Or does our pattern of faithfulness suggest day in and day out that he is our rescuer and that we need him? Secondly, who knows about our rescuer? If he saves us, who have we told? Darius was willing to declare it to his whole empire. If the Lord is our rescuer, who knows it? Or is it just a secret kept with us? What I find very fascinating about this story is how familiar it is with other things. When I read the story of Daniel in the lion's den, I hear the story of the nation of Israel in exile, taken away, sequestered, surrounded by opponents, and then ultimately returned, freed back to the land. And when you read the Old Testament, you hear songs of praise that now all the nations know who God is because of the exile and the return of his people. It's also very familiar with the life of Christ. The greatest man of righteousness, the sinless one who came as God's anointed for us to be rescued, was subjected to many traps, was put on trial unjustly, was crucified and buried. A stone was rolled over his tomb. The morning of the third day, people came to his tomb and found he was alive. And what happens after this rescue? His name is proclaimed to every tribe and tongue and nation. It also reminds me of us, his church, you and I, people who bear his name. We live out this same dynamic. 2 Peter, the Apostle Peter tells us this in chapter 2 of his second epistle. Dear friends, I urge you as foreigners and exiles. You hear that? I urge you as exiles in this world. In other words, this world's not our home. We belong somewhere else. I urge you as foreigners and exiles to abstain from sinful desires or the traps of temptation, which wage war against your soul. Live such good lives among the pagans that, though they may accuse you of wrongdoing, the traps of a righteous person, they may see your good deeds and glorify God in the day he visits us. So as I hear these echoes of Daniel's in the lion's den, I hear it in the life of Christ, and I hear it in the life of us as his church, that we are currently in a different kind of lion's den. We all face traps and temptations and unfair accusations, plots against us, simply because we love the Lord. So this is nothing new. And the question that Daniel had to wrestle with, who's the one who rescues me? What does it mean to remain faithful to him? That is our question. So as we face the difficulty of our traps, we maintain a pattern of faith in our rescuer when facing perilous traps. We maintain a pattern of faith. In other words, as I was thinking about this all week, I was thinking about maybe I should start praying 3 times a day, like Daniel did. And instead of kind of 1 time a day. Now, I know we're supposed to be constantly in prayer, but Daniel made it a point to set aside 3 particular times of prayer in the day. I don't want to legislate how you should pray. From the way I've been thinking about this is, it's made me evaluate what is my pattern of faithfulness such that it would endure a trap. And if I can't say I would endure a trap given my current pattern of faithfulness, maybe I should change my pattern. Maintain a pattern of faith in our rescuer when we face perilous traps. Join me in prayer. Heavenly Father, I thank you for this story. I thank you that there's more to it than just a Sunday school version of God Saves, but that it reminds us that we are all in this dynamic. We are all under some threat, either because of our righteousness or because of our sinfulness, and that we need to be vigilant in our faithfulness. We need to maintain fidelity with you. I thank you that your Son has come for us, that he went through his own experience of being killed and cast into a tomb of death and rising again, that provides us hope as we face our own struggles. We thank you for this. In Christ's name, amen.